Today is the inaugural event for this academic year for the Center for Oklahoma Studies. And I just wanted to say a couple words about what the Center for Oklahoma Studies is doing at this point. We sort of had a brief lull in the action when the pandemic was at its height. And we are kind of getting back into things now with more in-person events. And we're looking to possibly have some brown bags during the year. I encourage you to look at the Center for Oklahoma Studies website. We encourage faculty to list any related courses that you might have related to Oklahoma. Also to become, and this is for faculty, grad students, staff, to become associate or affiliate members of the center. If you're interested, there's a form on the website for that. So it will. We can also link projects to the website. So if you have a lab or certain research that you think would be better discoverable, if it were linked through the center, we can help try to do that as well. So we encourage you to take a look at the site and to participate in some of the activities as the year goes on. We are very excited today to have a number of excellent scholars with us. We have Doctors Sara Loss, Nathan Horton, Valerie Freeman, and Madalyn Peck and Maghin Brewer. And they are going to be talking about dialects of English in Oklahoma. So we're going to start out with Dr. Sara Loss, and if you would please welcome her.
Thank you. I'm just going to start out by introducing folks a little bit more. So I'm in the Department of English in the TESOL and Linguistics program, and when I now am part of the language studies lab there, and when I entered there, I had a big file cabinet and hard drive full of data, and so that's why I get to be here today. We have Dr. Horton, who's also in the Department of English, and he did his dissertation he did work with the Rodeo Project. We have Dr. Freeman, who's in Communication Sciences and Disorders, and she loves looking at people's vowels. We have Maghin Brewer, who is our undergraduate. She is part of the Advancing Undergraduate Research and Creative Activities program. So she can come and work with our data and get paid to do it. The Rodeo stands for Research of Oklahoma Dialects of English. Research on Dialects of English in Oklahoma. And last, Madalyn Peck, and she is one of the lab assistants who took on a lot of participatory roles with this data. And I will hand it over to Madalyn now to introduce everything.
Okay, so I get the privilege of introducing this project. First, we're going to talk about why language in Oklahoma might be interesting to study, and then we'll look at the previous work that has been done by people here at Oklahoma State and previously before that. And then we will talk about the contemporary work. I'll let each of these fabulous presenters give their projects, a summary of their projects. And then we'll talk about what we can do in the future with the data, what directions we'll go in. So you might have noticed that everyone speaks differently. We all have different grammar, we have different vocabulary, we all have different accents. And this has to do with where we come from, our region. So this is called regional dialectology. And this is where we study these different dialects. The way that you speak can be referred to as a dialect or a variety. This is a neutral term. We don't consider it positive or negative. And then this map was produced by William LeBove and other linguists who studied dialects in the US. And this has the different dialects plotted all across. So we all have an accent, we all have different language, and so that's why we're going to be talking about Oklahoma. Oklahoma is a crossroads between the Midland and the Southern dialects of the US, and we also have the West coming into the Panhandle. So we have this merging of different varieties. And so you can see that in some observable features, like in the South, we have pin and pen vowels are the same. So you might hear someone say pin and pin for both the writing utensil and the tack that you stick in a board. And then for the Midland feature, one example would be cot and cot. For me, these two vowels are the same because I have that merger, and maybe many of you do too. So we will talk about that a little bit more when Valerie comes to talk about the vowels. So this is a chart of the settlers who came during the Oklahoma Land Run. So previously, this was Native American land. And then in 1889, we all came and settled. And people mostly from the lower Midwest and Texas in the lower South. You can see that Midland Southern combination, right? So we decided to study the language in Oklahoma. Starting in the 1970s, Van Riper was part of mapping out the dialects of the U.S. So he was in Louisiana, and then he moved on to Oklahoma and started the Linguistic Atlas of Oklahoma. We actually have some of this data in the lab, in the Language Studies lab, so we can look at it to compare. And then in the 1990s, Bailey, Tillery, and Weichel, who were all here at Oklahoma State University, they did the survey of Oklahoma dialects. And so these two studies were more of a traditional regional dialectology survey. So asking people things like, what do you say for this? And showing them a picture of it, right? So looking at lexical items, sentence structure. So then in the 2010s, Dennis Preston, who is a sociolinguistics professor here at Oklahoma State University, was hired on with the Center for Oklahoma Studies. And he took the initiative to create the research on dialects of English in Oklahoma, which we call the Rodeo Project. And this is the pretty large amount of data that Sara inherited in the Language Studies lab. And this data was collected by other students. It's a survey. But it's also an interview. So people would answer questions about their perceptions. So this is called folk linguistics. We want to know what people themselves think about language. How do they perceive it? People who aren't linguists. And so these students, undergraduate and graduate students, collected the data. They did the interviews. They had people draw on maps of Oklahoma what they perceived the language to be like. And they also answered some of those traditional questions that were included in the other projects. So this is a picture of how we had all this data. And so what were we going to do with it? And so remember how I told you that dialects are neutral, to linguists at least, but people who aren't linguists have attitudes towards certain dialects. And so this map illustrates the southern dialects of Oklahoma, where they're kind of located. This is from an honors thesis done by Emily Hughes here at OSU. And this map illustrates negative attitudes toward dialects. So people are associating Southern dialect with a negative dialect. So this is how we can see that people have attitudes toward language, and Nathan is going to be talking more about that through his study. So you might be thinking, well, what are some features of Oklahoma English? So I talked about the sounds. We have different vowels. So pin, pen, sound like pin, pin. And then we have different words. So y'all is more of a Southern term. That's the most common that you're probably familiar with. And then sack instead of bag is more of a Midland feature. For sentences, we have examples like I done finished, which is saying I finished a while ago. I'm already done. I done finished instead of I finished. So that's a Southern feature. And then for Midland features, we have the car needs washed instead of the car needs to be washed. And then Sara will get to talk more about the sentence structure. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Valerie Freeman.
Hi, I'm Valerie Freeman, and I'm a socio-phonetician, which means that I'm interested in how pronunciations primarily vary with social factors. And those can be anything from region, like we've already been talking about, to age, gender, any kind of social group. And so I'm going to be talking a lot about vowels because vowels are the thing that vary the most between English dialects and different varieties of English. So I'm going to have several plots like this, and I'll kind of walk you through them if you're not familiar with what they're showing. So we can plot the acoustic features of vowels, and they end up being arranged roughly in relation to kind of where the bulk of your tongue is in your mouth when you make the vowels. So in the top corner, we have E in blue. And you can try to make just a couple of vowels with me and kind of feel where your tongue is. So if you make an E, your tongue's kind of squished up close to the front and up against your teeth. But if you make, say, an ah, down in the other corner, your jaw is open, your mouth is open, your tongue is lower. And so the dimensions kind of relate to roughly kind of how your tongue is placed. So the vowels on the front left diagonal go from E to A to I to E to A. And they are kind of made more in the front. Then the next row of vowels, these guys in here, the black and purple and red, are oo, and o. And they, in most dialects, many dialects of English, they're in the back. So that this shape would instead make more of a V or a U. But one very strong feature of Southern English, and as it turns out, Oklahoman English, is that those back vowels are fronted. So that they're not oo, but more like oo. Kind of like a little closer to I than oo. And the same goes for O and These are the vowels that I'm going to be looking at for the study I'm talking about today. But there are some other features on here if you're familiar with other vowel arrangements. Like we've been talking about how Oklahoma has some southern features and some midland features. This is a primarily southern feature. And some midland features, we've already mentioned the cot-cot merger, which I also have. They're the same for me. Those are indicated by these two in the back corner being overlapping. You can't tell them apart because they're the same. So Oklahomans also say cot and cot the same, just like I do. Okay, so this is kind of our basic arrangement of what vowels look like in Oklahoma. The study I'm talking about today is about pre-lateral mergers. So first, a term in the bottom here for what is a merger. This is when two sounds used to be pronounced differently, but now they're pronounced the same or almost the same. And this can create homophones. So I'll have several examples, and I'm going to use color to try to help separate what vowels I'm talking about. So pre-lateral mergers, that means vowels before L. And there's a bunch of pairs of vowels before L that create homophones using different mergers in different parts of the country and different age groups and such. So some examples of front vowels that were over on the front part of the vowel space. E and I becoming both kind of I-like before L. So like feel to fill. So real deal would be more like a real deal. You may have heard people say that. It's very common in the red part on the map here in the Inland South, also in African American language, and lots of other places and lots of other ages. Another pair is fail fell or sail sell. So you might hear like the wind, like it's for sell rather than sail. But today I'm looking at those back vowels that were fronted. So in the back, we have a whole bunch of possible pairs. You would think, just like in the front, you would just have 2 possible pairs, but here things get mushier. So we have places in the country where pull is pronounced like pole. It's called the bull-bull merger. Or where pull is pronounced like pool. Or where both pull and pull are all pronounced like pool. So they're pool, pool, pool. Any of these combinations can be found in the Pittsburgh area, which is in red on the map there. But various other combinations of these are found in different places, kind of all over where the yellow dots are on the map, including yellow dots in Oklahoma. But there are only 4 people representing Oklahoma in this map, so I wanted to know more. I hear my students saying some of these things, I swear it. So let's find out what they're doing. A preview, something I discovered that I wasn't looking for, is that dull and dole are also involved. So I don't say it like dull, but I can if I try hard. I have the merger at the bottom, which doesn't come into play, but since I'm saying it, I may as well tell you what I'm saying. I have pull and pole with no vowel at all. It's just pull and dull and bull, and all of them are the same for me. Because of that, it can be hard to tell which one I'm talking about. So I'm going to use these words on the left to help differentiate which word I'm talking about. So gold will always be for O, and spool will always be for oo, and gulf will always be for ul, and wool will always be for ul. They're also color-coded to help out. So my question in this study was what mergers, what possible combinations of these 4 vowels might create homophones? So we could have all of these possible 2-way combinations, or it could be like some other places where we have 3 or possibly 4-way combinations. So maybe all of these have the same vowel, or maybe 2 pairs of 2, or 1 of 3, or so this is what I was looking for. So these are the vowels in question when they're not before L. And this is what they look like before L. So first, they're not centralized. They're back. So they're in the back of the vowel space, so we get something like move, but cool. U versus oo before L. So that's the first thing. Also, gulf also raises. So it's not directly in the back, but it also raises up a bit. But it's not always like this for every person. There's a lot of variation between people. So in looking at what all the different vowels did across almost 100 people, I saw that oo and o basically just backed. So they are in the back vowel space at roughly the same height that they are when they're not before L in the central space. So I'm going to call those my stable anchors. Not every person has them very stable. Some people move them a little bit, but for the most people have them looking like this. Then the other 2 vary a lot. So gulf heads toward gold, but to different degrees for different people. So some people pronounce gulf like gulf, like the vowel in strut. Other people pronounce it just like the vowel in gold, so they say dole and gulf. And then there's lots of people with steps in between. The wool vowel, or the pull vowel, can be like gold or like spool or anywhere in between. So I'm going to dig into that one a little more. So yes, they can be anywhere in between. It can sound just like pull, it can sound a little bit higher than pull, or right in between, or a little like spool, or a lot like spool. But, I say this varies. Does that mean any person can say any of these? Sure, but people tend to say their vowels in a similar way, in most situations. So when I say it varies, in this case I'm talking about different people pronouncing it differently. Who pronounces them this way or that way? That's what sociolinguists are really interested in. Who, what kind of person, when, where. And so in my first study, I saw that people from rural areas could fall anywhere on that continuum. But people from Tulsa and Oklahoma City and medium-sized towns did not say it like spool. So they could say it like gold or in between, but they didn't go all the way to spool. So maybe that's not the cool way to talk anymore. I don't know. In the past, it was in Oklahoma. So if it's not just where you're from or what size of city you're from, there are other factors that might contribute to how people pronounce these vowels. I had a graduate student, Molly Landers, who looked at rootedness as one of the factors. So this is kind of like attachment to your hometown or kind of local pride, attachment to your community. And often what we find is that people who are more rooted to their hometown, especially if they still live there, tend to use more of the local dialect features. And they're proud of it too. Even if they know that it's stigmatized from the outside, they know who they are and they're proud to use it. So she looked at rootedness in the same people that we recorded before. So they're from all different places in Oklahoma, which kind of complicates the story even more. And it's a complicated set of arrangements that we're still looking into. There must be another feature involved. All I can say right now is that, middle-aged men from cities might talk differently from young ladies from rural areas, and all different kinds of combinations. So stay tuned, because we're still looking into what some other factors might be. It's not just where you're from. It's not just your age or your gender, or whether you went to college or not, or whether you're from a small place or a big place. There's also other things that I haven't found yet, but I'm looking. And so some of the big takeaways that apply to lots of different sociolinguistic studies are to remember that language use varies by a bunch of different social factors. And it can make it really complicated because it's never just one. You are not just one thing, but a collection of a bunch of social factors. And language is always changing. It changes over time, so that we don't speak the same way that we did several generations ago. And our grandparents speak a little differently than their grandkids, and so on. And this variation happens at all levels of language. So I've talked about one of the tiniest bits, vowels, but we can also vary on the words we use and the grammar, the sentence structures, and how we perceive and judge other people, which are previews to our next one. Sarah's going to talk about grammar.
It's a little trickier to talk about sentences because when you say words, you don't get marked off on a paper for how you pronounce a word typically, but you can get corrective feedback for how you write a sentence. And also, sentences tend to have different meanings. So like I hear golf and golf kind of similar. I don't even know if my vowels were different. It's the same word to me. But we're looking at the construction below. I got me a cookie. This is called a personal dative. And you can see the green dots are where people say, yeah, I could say I got me a cookie. And the purple dots are where people say, no, that doesn't quite sound right to me. I don't think I'd say it that way. And what's really important here is that it's different than I got myself a cookie. Everyone everywhere can say I got myself a cookie. Fewer people can say I got me a cookie. And in Appalachia, where this is really used a lot, where you can say this in any situation, like your college professor can say, I got me a cookie, and no one blinks, it just sounds fine. There, you can get you a cookie for somebody else. And it means you're really satisfied that you got you a cookie. So in Oklahoma, there's kind of a mix, and we know this is started in Appalachia and kind of spread out. So one question is, what does it look like here in Oklahoma? So typically, these only work with what Larry Horn calls down-home verbs. So it's much better to say I got me a cookie than I purchased me a cookie. If you can use this construction, you can always say I got me a cookie, but fewer people can say you got you a cookie, and even fewer people, in Appalachia at least, can say he got him a cookie. And it's always better to say he got you a cookie than just you have you a cookie. Somehow getting one sounds better than when you say you have one. It denotes satisfaction, so you can't say things like, I dropped me a cookie, because no one would be satisfied in that situation. You can only use it with indefinite articles like a or some. So I got me a cookie, I got me some cookies, but you can't really say I got me the cookie. Now, in the Midland dialect area, where this is extended to, you can say it with a word like the if you have a lot of other stuff telling you about the cookie you got. So in the Midlands, you can say, I got me the cookie that was on the counter. Yeah, they're all subconscious, and you'll just say, okay, this one sounds good. This one I wouldn't say, I don't know why. And then we come in and we look for the pattern. And then my favorite part is, yeah, you can get you a cookie for somebody else, which just blows my mind as a non-user of this one. When I first started looking at this, like, you wanted to confirm they were in Oklahoma before you started asking people, can you say you got you a cookie? And so I checked out the oral history collection that's here in the library. Shout out to Sarah Milligan. I looked at all of these, and I found most of them in Oklahoma 100-Year Life and The Big Top Show Goes On, which is about the circus. I found 35 tokens. 7 females produced 14 tokens, and 8 males produced 21 tokens, so kind of even. And I did an even, so 30 were from women, 30 were from men when I looked at the oral histories. And I have one to play. We'll see how I do.
Well, you have to make time to take you a nap, to rest. I mean, at least three hours anyway, 3 or 4. Well, actually, what I'd probably do, I'd go to sleep about 6 o'clock, because I'd have to get up about 10 and go back to work. I try to eat my dinner and then go take me a little nap so I can get up at 10 to work till about 12 or 1, then get up at 5:30. So.
And he's talking about how much you work when you work in the circus. This is from the circus ones. So you see the take you a nap and take me a little nap. What I found was I saw down-home verbs, right? There was no one purchasing them anything. They're all getting them something. I found 30 tokens of I got me. Just one that you got to find time to take you a nap. That was the only one with you. And there were 4, he took him a nap or he got him a nap. They did occur most with getting verbs, like getting, and then baking, building. It also occurred with no one said I have me anything. They seem to denote satisfaction. They only occurred with and some. No one else was ever a recipient here, so you always built you something for yourself. And I kind of think it's a bit stigmatized, because when the oral histories where we interviewed like alumni who were successful, they were never using it. It was mostly with the older speakers or the people who were associated with maybe not as prestigious jobs in the circus. But you don't really know anything from just looking and seeing what's out there, because just because you don't see something doesn't mean people can't say it or don't think it's an okay construction, right? Like, I don't say ain't in the classroom, but I can say it sometimes. So, and I know when it sounds okay and when it doesn't sound okay. So we also want to ask people what they do. So I send out a survey, and I send it to folks here in Oklahoma, and I also send it to people in Appalachia, just to make sure what we thought about them was true. And it is true, you can only use them with down home verbs. No one's purchasing them a cookie. Oklahomans like first person the best, I got me a cookie. But then they he got him a cookie. And very few people said, well, you got you a cookie's okay. They didn't like I have me a cookie. They liked getting a cookie. They liked baking you a cookie. It did denote satisfaction. No one was upset when a cookie crumbled or something spilled. It did only work with indefinite articles, so that's more like Appalachia than the Midlands, so people couldn't say, I got me the last cookie on the counter. And you can't have someone else be the recipient. If you get you a cookie, that cookie's for you. You're not going to give it to somebody else. And it does still seem to be stigmatized. I say this because some people I asked in Oklahoma to do it said, well, you don't want me to do it because I don't speak Hick. So this is not like Appalachia where everyone can say it. So in conclusion, it's a little different here in Oklahoma than Appalachia. So fewer verb types we can use it with. The persons, first person, second person, I got me, you got you, that was a little different. And I think the big one is you can't get you a cookie for somebody else. And I say that because a lot's been written on how you can get you a cookie for someone else, and a lot of ways of thinking about it. It's kind of a strange thing, actually. In Oklahoma, it's a little more what you'd expect there to be with how other parts of our language work. And surprisingly, we're not like the Midland dialect, because you can't say I got me the last cookie on the counter. So that's my stuff on personal datives, and I'll hand it over to Nathan, who's going to talk to you about perceptions.
Okay, thank you. So Valerie talked to us some about how people are actually talking, and Sarah was asking people, can you say this? Does this work for you? But still looking at how people are potentially talking. And the study that I'm going to tell you about is looking at how people feel about other people's language in Oklahoma and their own language. Right? So as we all know, young people are widely known to misuse or degrade or otherwise ruin language, right? They're texting and whatever they're doing, right? This is a super commonly held perspective across many, actually like hundreds and thousands of years. And linguists refer to this as the complaint tradition, right? For people to say, in 10 years, nobody's going to be able to write a damn sentence anymore because they have whatever, right? This is in like Greek times, people were saying this, right? But of course, we're all doing just fine. So this is the complaint tradition, where generally older people talk this way about younger people and their language. But I was curious how, when people speak a stigmatized variety, like Oklahoma English, and we've kind of established that Oklahoma English is viewed pretty negatively by people outside and by inside, and certainly Southern English is viewed that way. So when people share a stigmatized variety, which is viewed negatively, do they take the same perspective? Or do they think maybe their kids are getting better than them at talking, right? So I looked at a few families in rural Oklahoma. There's one large family that is very rooted in Copan, Oklahoma, which is in the northeast corner. I'll show you a map in a minute. The population is about 970 in 2020. And then a family from the Minco and Tuttle area. And the populations of those two towns are about 10,000 combined. And I looked at 3 different generations in here. So this is a little bit different in that I'm not talking about age in terms of when somebody was born. This is all in relation to other people in their family, right? So when I say older and younger speakers, because we do look at language and how it changes over time, but here I'm just interested in how people are talking about different generations. So I had one grandparent, sort of the matriarch of the family in both families, in generation 1. In generation 2, I had 3 parents, so 3 children of generation 1 in each family. And then generation 3, the children, 5 from Copan, and then 2 from the Minco and Tuttle families. Okay, so here's Copan up here, right near Kansas, getting into the Midlands area, and then here's Minco and Tuttle down here. And I also want to point out, too, that, so I'm interested in how people feel about each other's language, right? Whether they think that it's good or bad or whatever. But this is a vowel chart, kind of like what Valerie showed us. And I do want to point out, so if we look at the Copan family here, these are their vowel charts, right? So the green line is for the youngest generation, the blue line is for the middle generation, and the black line is for the oldest generation. So in terms of vowels, these are like indistinguishable to the human ear, right? These 3 people, in terms of vowels anyway, talk just like each other, right? So as we're going to see, they say they talk way worse than me or better than me, but really, at least in terms of vowels, they're talking a lot like each other. And we also see here, so here's cot, right here, totally collapsed, right, together, merged. We also have oo, o, all collapsing, falling forward, fronted, right? So a lot of these same features, the Southern and Midland features. So all of these people are talking quite Oklahoman. But again, interestingly, for this study, we're concerned with how much they talk like each other, which is a lot, right? So what I did is in the course of this sociolinguistic interview that we were doing, I kind of added on some other questions. And so I asked them to rate their relatives from the other two generations on a 5-point Likert scale in terms of 4 factors. So I would say, how much do you think you talk? So let's say I'm interviewing generation 1, the oldest generation. I would say, how much do you think that you talk like your kids? Or how much do you think that your grandkids talk like you, right? And they would rate a lot, not a lot, about the same. How Oklahoman do you think that your kids sound versus your grandkids? And then this is the fun one. How much do you think your kids and grandkids talk better than you, worse than you, a lot worse than you? What do you think? And then how well can you understand your relatives, right? Older, younger, whatever. And then I would also ask them if they ever gave any rating that was different from themselves. So if they said they talk the same as me, they sound as Oklahoman as me, they sound whatever, then I'll just move on. But if they said they talk way worse, I would say, why do you think they talk worse? So generation 1 and 2, the older generation said, well, I think my kids talk pretty similar to me. They sound a lot like me, right? But interestingly, the youngest generation all tended to say, I don't talk like my parents and grandparents, right? And we'll look at why they say that, but they generally said, I don't sound like them. All 3 generations said that they all sound a lot like a typical Oklahoman, right? And I think it's also worth noting these are very rooted families in pretty rural areas in Oklahoma too. So there might not be as much of this internal stigma about the way that they talk. Generation 1, the oldest generation, said generation 2 and generation 3 talk better than them. So we're already kind of seeing, in terms of their ratings, we're seeing that generation 1, the oldest generation, is saying actually the younger people are doing better than me, right? Generation 2 follows this pattern and said, my parents talk terribly and my kids talk better than me, right? And then generation 3, the youngest generation, interestingly, they didn't say my parents and grandparents. In terms of their ratings, we'll see some quotes from them, but in terms of their ratings, they didn't say, they said they talk about as well as them, right? They tended not to say they talk too terribly until they started talking about it. We'll see. So let's look at the comments that they make. So, whenever they gave this different rating, I asked them to kind of justify, why do you think they sound worse or better or whatever? And there were 2 kind of big categories that emerged. And the first one was education, okay? And then the second one had to do with references to Oklahoma phonology or lexicon or grammar or something like that. And we'll look at some examples. So, for example, Dorothy, who's sort of from generation 1 from the Minko and Tuttle family, said about her son Charles, who has a PhD. And I'll just play this audio because I love audio. Love to hear the people talk, and so you can kind of follow along.
We have a hard time communicating with each other, and I don't know exactly the reason why, but maybe because a lot of times he uses words that I have to get the dictionary and look up to find out what they are. And, of course, that's good for me because that way I'm searching out what a word means. But I'm from old school, and he's got an education and I don't. So I think that's what the problem is with our communication.
So here she's saying, he has this education, and so they have a harder time communicating, and he talks better than her because he's had an education that she might not have. And Charles reciprocates this feeling. He just says, I use better English than she does. I'm more educated than she is. That's the whole quote, actually. That's what he said, and then moved on. And then he said about his children, who were all in college at the time, he said, I think they're better than me. I think they talk better than me. All 3 of them do. They're much more articulate, which a lot of times is sort of a proxy for like educated, right? People might use that word. Okay, so moving on to the specific phonological and lexical items. So these were only mentioned by generation 3. So the youngest generation talked a lot about the ways that typically Oklahoman and so Southern and Midlands features that their relatives used. So in all 4 questions, when I would say, do they sound very Oklahoman? They would say, yeah, they sound a lot like an Oklahoman or a little bit more than me. And I would say, why? And they all talked about these accent features. And they used it to talk about generation 1 and generation 2. So, and I coded this either as specific phonological or lexical observations if they mention a specific pronunciation or word, or if they just said, they have more accent than me, or they have more dialect. And remember, linguists, when we talk about dialect and accent, this is totally neutral. This is just your language is different from your language, right? But a lot of times that's used negatively. But also remember, in terms of pronunciation, at least in vowels, and we have lots of data beyond vowels, I just showed you those charts, these people talk very, very similar to each other, right? Okay, so one thing that's interesting, and the title of this section is She's One That Says Wash, is that almost every member of Generation 3 mentioned the other people saying the word wash as the word wash, right? So he talks a little more like my Nana. Some words he just pronounces different, like wash, he'll say wash and not wash. And let me show you, we're going to listen to this clip, and I want you to listen to the intonation contour when we get to wash.
I have to say somewhat worse.
Okay, a little worse.
Yeah.
How come?
Well, she's a little bit more Oklahoman, I would say, just the way that she pronounces some things. She's one that says wash.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's a couple of other things that she says that are a little off.
So this falling intonation, she's one that says wash, right? She's like so disappointed that her grandma says wash. And also things that are a little bit off, right? Which is sort of, I mean, any of us who are from Oklahoma and talk like Oklahomans know that people have this attitude about Oklahoman English, but this person holds this about her grandmother as well. And then, let's see. Okay, another person.
The accent and some of the things she says, like, she says wash instead of wash, and we always, like, hey, what? Like, wash instead of wash. So that's what I kind of make fun of her about.
Okay, and this is interesting too, right? Making fun of your grandparents for the way that they talk is kind of a reversal of what's been reported in lots of other intergenerational linguistic studies, right? Where I'm like, you know, any young people who say like in all of its possible contexts know exactly how their grandparents feel about that, probably. And then there's other typically Southern phonological or lexical features that they mention. So here's the thing. So my grandma kind of like Tulsa. She says Tulsa, like it's a little different. I don't know. She kind of draws things out more, I guess. And so this is looking at that pre-lateral merger, right? And something that's interesting here is that I actually have a recording of her grandma saying Tulsa, right? So that's something that's cool about interviewing these different people. So this can kind of give us an idea in terms of looking at perceptions. This kind of gives us an idea. So this is what this young person who maybe does a different kind of merger, this is how they think that their grandma is using this merger. And because I have a recording of the actual person, we can see how she's performing that merger, right? And then her father tends to put S's on the ends of words like Walmart's or La Fiestas. My grandma says more words of an Oklahoma person than any of us. And I think it's more accent than words. So accent here, if it's not words, then it's probably pronunciation, the vowels, right? She doesn't really say words like y'all and stuff. And this is funny because, so the person in blue here, the mother is an English teacher. And so the daughter is convinced that her mother never says y'all, even though she uses y'all nonstop throughout her entire interview, right? But she says it's more accent than words, which is interesting because, again, they talk the same in terms of pronunciation, right? Their vowels are very similar. And then they have a little bit more of an accent. So what does this tell us? So something that's interesting is that older speakers of Oklahoma English, a stigmatized variety by its own users and certainly out externally, do not necessarily participate in this complaint tradition, at least not about their family specifically, right? So there's some cool things where we can see this person says their mom never says y'all, but then I have her mom saying y'all, right? But on the other hand, they might say totally different things if I ask the grandparents, do young people around here talk differently from you, right? When they're talking about their family specifically, they have a different perspective. So at least about their family, they're not doing the complaint tradition. And in fact, it goes the other way, right? The younger people are getting better. They're getting these things that Oklahoma's kind of stigmatized for. They're getting more education and whatever and improving their English, right? And some of those sociolinguistic explanations that they gave, again, are the education and then these stereotypically Southern or Oklahoman phonological and lexical items. Okay, I'm going to turn over to Maghin now.
Okay, just to give a brief overview of the presentation so far, as we have seen, there is a mix between Southern and Midland features within the language of Oklahoma, but there are also usages that are more uniquely patterned to Oklahoma itself. And as Nathan said, as far as older people and younger people and how they speak, older people don't really look at younger people as talking worse. If anything, they look at us as talking better. So as long as people identify with these different regional dialects, we'll most likely continue to see a mix of these Southern and Midland dialects, but there's still a lot that we do not know. And so currently, I specifically have been working in the language studies lab with Dr. Loss to make the rodeo data more accessible for not only myself, but for other students and faculty to use the data so then they can use it for their own projects. And we've also updated the rodeo survey since the original surveys that we had were from years ago. We wanted to make it more modern. So we did that. And I'm also going to be adding more data to the research. I will be interviewing underrepresented populations, so people of color, because I found that whenever I started last semester, it was mostly white people, and you can never have too much inclusivity. So I decided that it would be best to add on to it. So the question that I will be researching is, how do people of color in Oklahoma accommodate to these mixtures of South and Midland regional dialects, if any at all? And there were some other research studies that were done for different states. So like Wolfram from 2003, he found that middle-aged African-American speakers in Hyde County in North Carolina, they use similar local forms as white speakers, but Bloomquist in 2009 found that African-American speakers in the lower Susquehanna Valley in Pennsylvania did not accommodate. So I will be looking at the Oklahoma region. So that's what we are doing currently, and I will be also working on that in the future. So that concludes our presentation, and thank you guys so much for coming out today.